Well,
All righty, good evening, everyone. My name is Daniel Barrett. I'm an event facilitator here at McNally Robinson Booksellers. And before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that we are on Treaty 1 territory, and that the land on which we are gathered is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Aninawak, Anishinaabe, Dakota, and Dene peoples, as well as the homeland of the Red River Métis. Additionally, McNally Robinson Booksellers itself rests on the land once occupied by the Métis community of Roostertown. And of course, thank you all for joining us here tonight for the launch of the Emma LaRocque Reader on Being Human, published by the University of Toronto Press. Let's give a round of applause. A big many thanks to Elaine Coburn, the editor of this volume, for organizing this event and for putting together such a wonderful team here to speak with us tonight. It's going to be a treat. Yeah, another round of applause. So just to let you know how the event will go tonight, there will be a series of presentations followed by a reading from Professor Emma LaRocque herself. And so long as time permits, there will be an opportunity for you to ask questions. So if you do have a question here tonight, just raise your hand enough for me to see, and I'll come by with a wireless microphone, which is simply just to ensure that you're heard on tonight's live stream for the folks who are watching at home tonight. And then, of course, I'll be back at the event to review the signing procedure, which will take place to my right over here at the table. And then I'd like to call up the host for the evening, Professor Chris Trott.
Well, good evening. Host was not the title that I was aware of, but that's okay. I'm Chris Trott, as just been mentioned, and welcome to the launch of Emma's book. I have this right. I've known Emma far too long. Welcome to the launch of Professor LaRocque's book. And I should get it right this time.
Dr. LaRocque.
Well, now I'm in trouble. Apparently it's Dr. LaRocque. Okay. How about Professor Dr. LaRocque? There we go. We'll get it straight. It's really a great privilege to and honor to introduce Professor Dr. LaRocque tonight. Most of you will have read the biography that's on the cover of the book or be aware of parts of Emma's biography. I'm not going to go through it in detail. Emma was born in northern Alberta, and by challenging the forces of colonialism, racism, and sexism, has now ended up as a full professor in Indigenous studies and the most acclaimed and significant Indigenous scholar in Canada. She actually has a degree in peace studies, degree in history, and an interdisciplinary PhD simply because no single discipline could contain her thought or her ideas. She is one of the founding members of the Department of Indigenous Studies at the University of Manitoba, establishing most of the core courses and setting the standards of scholarship over the years. She has now been with the department for 50 years. She has published many, many articles, and you are all fortunate that the key ones are now in the Emma LaRocque Reader. For those of us who, prior to the existence of the Emma LaRocque Reader, had to look for them all individually, and they're all sources spread all over the place, you guys are very, very lucky. And thank you, Elaine, for doing that. So the key ones have been to gather together in the reader. There are lots more, by the way, let me assure you. And in addition, she has published When the Other Is Me, there's copies over here, When the Other Is Me in 2011. I am sure that Drs. Cariou, Kulychyski, and Coburn are far more competent than I am in outlining the core areas of Emma's work. Her sharp critiques of colonialism and racism, her advancing the use of voice in scholarly writing, and her promotion and critical assessment of Indigenous literatures. But I want to say that Emma is a very proud Cree-Métis scholar. She speaks Cree and is deeply rooted in her Métis upbringing. Although her writing chronicles the racism she has faced, there is another thread that speaks of her home and her family. My favorite stories from Emma are the ones about blueberry picking in her favorite blueberry patch, sitting with her father, watching the moon rise over the river behind their home, and reveling in the traditional stories told by her parents. When you read those stories in Emma's work, there's a certain tenderness that arises, rather than the sharp, biting critique of colonialism. Through the structures of colonialism, her family has never held title to the lands upon which they live. but is a deep relationship of her to the people and her people to their place that Emma is able to speak out of her land in northern Alberta. So tonight we will have professors, and I was wrong, Warren, I'm sorry. We will have Professors Kulychyski first, and Professor Warren Cariou to speak, and then Professor Elaine Coburn, the editor of the book, to speak for about 5 to 7 minutes each. Then we will follow with Dr. LaRocque, Professor Dr. LaRocque, giving us selections from her book. And then at 8 o'clock promptly, there will be a book signing over here. So I'm going to ask Professor Kulychyski to come forward first. I was told that you're first, Professor Kulychyski. Professor Kulychyski is a full professor in the Department of Indigenous Studies and was the head of the department at the time when Dr. LaRocque became a full professor. And therein lies a story which I hope you won't tell. Peter.
Thanks for that. And I also want to thank Elaine for doing this book. Was the result of a lot of work. It's not just you find them, you figure out what order they go in, you stick them in there, you staple it shut, you send it to the publisher, and you're all done. Yeah, you've got a book. In fact, a lot of these pieces are very, very hard to find. And then we know that although we love Emma, working with Emma can be a bit of a challenge here and there at times. And so between the actual work of pulling the stuff together and meeting with Emma, talking her over, I can only imagine, but it's a huge process, and we're grateful to you for exactly that reason, for bringing all of this stuff together. I guess I want to talk a little bit about the ideas part of this, and I want to talk about On Being Human as the subtitle, and Emma's project, about extending the project of thinking of what is human in areas where it was largely denied. And this is an ancient debate, and it has a modern form. In its modern form, in the post-war period, we got ever-growing and systematic challenges to European humanism. And we got challenges that said European humanism is basically a description of the existence of white European males, privileged white European males. And so we basically, when faced with that, we have really two options. We can reject the category altogether. We can say this is serving a very particular interest and it doesn't help other interests, and it's time to just jettison the category and involve ourselves more in particularisms and in thinking about the differences. Or we can say, we can take up a different challenge and say the notion of humanism as a notion is not bad, but it needs to be extended. And it's not just, oh, we can apply it to everybody. It's, we have to look at the enormous differences, both in people's circumstances and in terms of people's cultures and lifelines. And we have to recognize that some of these are contradictory to each other. Some things, people can argue for months about which direction they want to play or any element of ritual life. And can very easily, and we're seeing it in the world today, dismiss huge swaths of the population as not deserving the category human. So Emma has been, and I'm just going to say Emma because she's a friend and I can't get away from that. And that's partly what makes this a privilege. It's a privilege to be able to, at some stage in your life, be able to have friends and be able to speak to the accomplishments that we've had. I think it's a joyous thing for me, actually. Emma has worked relentlessly to say the category of human hasn't been applied to Indigenous people, to show where and how that's happened and how long that's happened and how it's continuing to happen. And then also to say that that category needs to be expanded. And Indigenous people can teach humanism as much as humanism can teach Indigenous people. These are all key themes circulating in Emma's work. And I think that situates Emma's work. To me, there are certain thinkers, like we can say Sylvia Wintour, the Caribbean dramatist, who absolutely centers the notion of the humanity of Black Caribbean bodies and other bodies. We can think about Atu Seshiotu, who is actually one of my academic advisors, but his book on left universalism in Afrocentric essays is also an attempt to, in in a time when a lot of the left scholars are very suspicious of universalism, Act 2 is basically saying we need it more than ever, and I think lines up very well with Emma's work. Another thinker who I just want to mention is Hortense Spillers. Hortense Spillers is sort of seen now, I think, as the godmother of a lot of African-American thought. And she's a touchstone for Alexander Wahili. She's a touchstone for Frank Widdowson, although she herself would not call herself an Afro-pessimist. A number of the most significant African-American thinkers, especially, of course, her famous essay, Mama's Baby, Daddy's Maybe, which is very wide, probably the most widely read essay by an African-American scholar. And generationally now, she's been really picked up and brought forward by a new wave of people. I think that Dr. LaRocque, I'm hoping that this book will actually help solidify Dr. LaRocque's position, as what Chris said, the leading Indigenous theoretical scholar in the country. I think when we see the range of her work, the kind of work she's been doing, the duration which she's been doing it, the consistency of it, and the clearness of her vision, I think we're in the presence of a major thinker. And being in the presence of a thinker like that, I think, raises us all up and challenges us all and asks us to look at things with new and clear eyes and move forward in a way that maybe can finally make a few steps towards the justice that we're all deserve. So I want to thank Emma for doing the writing. I want to thank Elaine for bringing these particular parts of her writing to us. I hope it will be consequential. I hope people will be able to see the breadth of Dr. LaRocque's work through this and be moved by it and maybe make some changes as a result of it.
Thank you, Peter. That always helps to clarify our thinking a little bit. So next, Dr. Cariou. Dr. Cariou is a professor in the Department of English at the University of Manitoba. I can only say that I really liked this book. I forgot the title. As soon as I said that, I forgot the title. Lake of the Prairies. Thank you, Lauren. It was one of those books that actually helped me in a lot of thinking about indigeneity and Indigenous. But anyway, I'll let Dr. Cariou talk about that. Well, not about his own book, but about how that works in with Emma's understanding. Now, of course, I'm going to assign Dr. Cariou, since he is the guy in the English department, right? I know that Dr. Coburn is as well. He has to talk about the poetry. Okay, go for it, Laurel.
Thank you, Chris. Great to see everyone here. And yes, I was very much hoping to have a chance to talk about the poetry, and I will do that. Congratulations, Emma, on this amazing accomplishment, because this is a summation of all the work that you've done in addition to your other books. And also, congratulations to Elaine for doing that work, for making it, presenting all of that work in a way that is now going to be accessible to another generation of readers. I think that's incredibly important. And I really, so having a chance to read the book just before it came out, I was struck by how current all of these articles, all of this academic research is. Most academic writing doesn't really hold up after about 20 years, maybe less, right? This work is so current, from the earliest parts of the book right up to the very recent publications. And that, I think, is a mark of the originality of Emma LaRocque's thinking, the clarity of her writing, and the fact that, as Chris noted, that she's writing from a place, she's writing from her homeland, and bringing that sensibility into her writing. And that's something that has resonated with more than one generation now of scholars, I think. This collection is also wonderful in that it brings together critical writing and poetry, in which those two genres are fairly different and are not often held together. And I think in Emma's work, I've always, been from the very first time that I got to know her, I've been saying, you really should publish a book of those poems because they're amazing. But I think this is even better because these poems speak to the articles. They speak to the critical concepts that she's bringing into those prose works in different ways. They open up those ideas in new ways. And I think the poems, they can resonate in our minds in a different way. They can stay in our memories in a different way as well. And one of my favorite Emma LaRocque poems is Long Way From Home, which is one that I think Elaine was thinking about it early on in this project as well. And, for me, it resonated partly because I come from a small town just over the Saskatchewan-Alberta border from where Emma grew up, and came to the big city and to make my way in academia. And when I read that poem, I was reminded that I'm not alone here. Someone else has gone ahead of me. But when Emma wrote that poem, there were hardly any other Indigenous people in the Academy at all. So she has made that institutional effort and activism to make her voice known within the hallways of the Academy. And that has made a huge difference to my generation and to the next generations as well. I note that in that poem, one of the lines at the very beginning is, "I've walked these hallways a long time now." And I realized that when she wrote that, she had already walked the hallways for a long time, but that was 34 years ago. So she has walked the hallways for a lot longer and seen and been part of and really led to a lot of change in the university and in the makeup of our professoriate, having more Indigenous faculty, having more awareness of Indigenous issues in the university. We still have a long ways to go, but Emma has made a huge, huge difference, forging the path for so many of us as Indigenous scholars as we try to meet those steps that as Peter was mentioning. And so I want to just read a little brief part from Long Way From Home that just inspires me so much. This is toward the end of the poem. And she writes, "Oh, I did my footnotes so well. Nobody knows where I come from. I've walked these hallways with them a long time now, and still they don't see. The earth gives eyes. Injustice gives rage. Now I'm standing here, prehistoric and all, pulling out their fence posts of civilization, one by one." I'll stop there and not get to the crescendo moment of the poem. But I think this poem is a profound distillation of Emma LaRocque's decades of work, and her sacrifice and her focus and her dealing with, more than discomfort, racism within those hallways, in a place that for a long time didn't have room for her, and I think it did. She has made space for herself and for her kin in this intellectual landscape that was hostile. And it's a process of making home that she has undergone and worked through and written about throughout her work. And I think she has made those hallways home and brought the sensibility of her Northern Alberta bush upbringing into that work in an incredibly important way. So thank you to Emma for that half century of incredible work that is distilled in this volume. And thanks to Elaine for all the work, bringing these pieces together, making them accessible now for our students and for their students as well.
Thank you, Warren, and thank you for speaking about the poems. There was some ructions over the inclusion of poems in the book and which ones were to be included. I do know that Elaine has on her computer, I think, the complete poetic works of Emma LaRocque. So if you happen to mention a poem, she's got it, even if Emma doesn't remember writing it. So But I think it's an important point that Warren is making. The book is beautifully balanced between pretty tough, critical, academic, scholarly papers and beautiful poetry. So that's what I say. Now I get to introduce next Elaine Coburn. This is actually the first time I've met Elaine, although there has been much correspondence over the years. But Elaine has been the editor behind this book, and she was the one who had to make the actual tough decisions. Peter and I just gave her a whole lot of blather, and then she had to make the tough decisions out of it. But we want to thank you, Elaine, for all that you've done in pulling this together. Come and tell us what you've done. Elaine Coburn.
Before I begin, I'd just like to thank McNally Robinson's Bookstore for hosting today's event, editor Jody Luchak and the University of Toronto Press. I knew Jody would understand what this book was about and present it in the right way. Professors Chris Trott, Peter Kulychyski, and Warren Cariou for their introductions and helping me to put the book together in a way that honors Emma as she should be. A special thank you to Ruthie and of course to Emma LaRocque, whose wonderful writing has brought us together today. My name is Elaine Coburn, and I'm a professor of international studies at York University and here as the editor of the Reader. And I'm very pleased and honored to be celebrating on being human. The purpose of the Reader is to bring together a selection of LaRocque's writing from a 50-year period, making them accessible in a way that they were not before. Although her writings and poetry are widely anthologized, and her first and second books, Defending the Indian, published in 1975, and When the Other Is Me, published in 2010, remain vital contributions in their own right, much of her writing is scattered across different publications. This makes it difficult to appreciate her contributions as a whole. The Reader invites those unfamiliar with Emma's scholarship in poetry to discover her unique, urgent voice, while making her writing more easily available to those who know her work so that they may fully engage with the range and breadth of her insights. As the title suggests, the Emma LaRocque Reader asks questions that are at once specific, personal, and universal. That is true for all of us. What does it mean to be human? How do we grapple with existential loneliness, an inevitable aspect of the human condition? How do we celebrate the places and the people that we love, the Blueberry Hills of our childhood? What do official histories tell us about our past, and what truths do they hide? Amidst great inequalities and the terrible oppression that marks too many lives, how can we imagine more just futures together? What role do artists play in that imagining as they create and share their stories with us? These are some of the questions that Professor Emma LaRocque, Professor Dr. Emma LaRocque asks about the human condition in her writing from 1975 until today, and I know into the future. As for all of us, the universally human is anchored in the unrepeatable experience of a singular human life, or as LaRocque puts it, of course we were human, and how best to know this but by our uniqueness. Emma LaRocque's own story can be told from many different starting points. As many here will know, she was born in 1949 in Lac La Biche in northern Alberta into a Cree-speaking Métis family. She then traveled, in her own words, farther and faster than most, from the comfortable log cabin of her childhood to school, to town, and eventually to Native Studies, as it was then known at the University of Manitoba. As she recalls, when I started teaching Native Canadian Lit all the way back in the 1970s, I was perhaps one of 2 or 3 professors in Canada teaching such a course. In her teaching and in her writing, LaRocque has drawn on her unique vantage point from living colonialism as a Métis person in what is now known as Canada. She has developed scholarship that stands beside the contributions of Edward Said and Albert Meunier, among others, who offer vital insights into the struggles to be recognized as human in the dehumanizing context of colonialism. This work began early. In LaRocque's 1975 book, Defending the Indian, written when she was just 19 years old and published when she was 20, Emma squarely challenges stereotypes about Indigenous people. Her writing deconstructs both obviously racist stereotypes, like the violent howling savage of cowboy films, but also the differently dehumanizing image of the noble savage, all wise, all knowing, and far too virtuous to have a future in our wicked world. In a theme that foreshadows much of her later work into Feathering the Indian, Emma wrote, neither the noble red man nor the savage Indian myth says much about Indians as human beings, people who are capable of the good, the bad, and the ugly, people who can laugh, cry, hate, and love, people who have dreams, aspirations, and hopes, people like the rest of humanity who are facing and adapting to change. The racism of too much popular culture, she regrets, is repeated in too much scholarly literature, and her work has challenged the invader lies that pass for mainstream historical accounts of the foundings of Canada, stories that heroize white resettlers and dehumanize Indigenous peoples. Besides her trenchant critiques of anti-Indigenous racism, LaRocque is a staunch champion of Indigenous literature, where she challenges the misuses of Indigenous literary voices. Too often, Emma laments, the literary qualities of Indigenous writing have been overlooked, with an emphasis instead on the anthropological and political dimensions. And she doesn't sound very funny so far, but you get a hint of her writing and critique when, against such social scientific readings, she asks, is a poem about loneliness or lost love or death a matter of ethnology? Instead, she invites us to, quote, analyze and theorize imagination, beauty, and play of words, which is the stuff of Aboriginal reflection, satires, novels, novellas, plays, and poetry. That is, Emma urges us to take up Indigenous literary contributions not as anthropology, but as literature. Characteristically, this does not mean that LaRocque is interested in easy praise. In a 1990 preface to a collection of Indigenous women's poetry, she writes, white Canadian reviewers, perhaps afraid to offend our presumed cultural sensibilities, have been reluctant to touch our works. We are reluctant to criticize each other. Taking up Indigenous literature demands our full, serious, critical engagement. And this means celebrating Indigenous authors for their powers of imagination and creation when successful, while acknowledging that not all literary pursuits are equally excellent in grasping the complexity of the Indigenous, that is, human condition. Emma's own poetry evokes a wide range of subjects, from loneliness to love of family to more overtly political themes. In a poem titled My Hometown, Northern Canada, South Africa, she foregrounds the theft of Métis lands by surveyors and unscrupulous land speculators. She writes, how did they get our blueberry meadows, our spruce and willow groves, our sun-clean streams, and blue sky lakes? Her prose is often as unforgettable as her poetry. Her capacity to critique injustice wherever it is found, whether it is in settler colonial violence and racist stereotypes, or in her own Cree-Métis community, where she has consistently opposed violence against women and girls, coexists along her own lyrical appreciation of existential truths learned from her earliest childhood. Writing of the land, she observes, the land feeds us, sings to us, gives us light, but it also steals us away from this earth. The land does teach us about life and death. Such beautifully expressed insights sit along trenchant political critiques of sexist racism that violence on Indigenous women, the colonial dispossession and displacement of Métis people, including her own family in her lifetime, reflections on the strengths and limits of contemporary Indigenous literature and poetry, and her hopes and conviction that whatever colonial violence we are born into, quote, we are more than the sum of our colonial relations. And indeed, our now more than a decade-long friendship reflects the possibilities of human connections irreducible to the unequal circumstances into which we are born but did not choose. I know of no other voice like Emma LaRocque's anywhere. And if you are not convinced yet, I invite you to consider the words of Parker Duchemin, Professor of English and Canadian Studies at Carleton University. Read this book. It might just blow your mind. Emma LaRocque, distinguished Métis poet, scholar, and essayist, has been quietly, and as we all know, not so quietly, dissecting the roots and architecture of our society with clarity, insight, and compassion for nearly 5 decades. In this magnificent collection of her writings, she is revealed as one of our most important critical thinkers and a true national treasure. With that, welcome.
Now you see the nature of Emma's and my relationship, because I'm told. It may be a surprise. I first met Emma in 1998 when I came to the University of Manitoba to interview for a job in the department. That was a long time ago, but 28 years ago now, so that's over half of the time Emma's been doing this. During the interview, Emma and I got into an argument. We did. Which I think I might have lost, but I'm not going to admit that publicly. We got into an argument, and I went home afterwards and I said, well, I can kiss that job goodbye. There's no chance in God's green earth I'm ever going to get that job. Well, there's a long story, but I did eventually get the job and came to work with the person who I'd argued with in my interview. And it turns out that we have been arguing for 28 years. And I learned that that's what Emma likes to do. Well, among other things, we won't get those other things we can't mention publicly. You are in for a treat. Emma is one of the finest thinkers that I have ever met or worked with, and one of the most articulate thinkers. And I'm delighted to introduce the star of the night, Emma LaRocque.
Got one right here next to you.
You or this?
Oh, sorry.
I'm always like, I'm sorry I have to sit down. I haven't been feeling well for a few days. And also my voice is going, I don't know, I have RSV. It's a cold that Elaine brought from Toronto. I think I have to sit down, because otherwise I'm keel over. Can I see? Get old, you know. If only all the students who hated me, if only they could see me now toddling around. With that. Hey, listen, I'm amazed you're all here. I was saying to Ruthie, I don't know, what if nobody comes? So thank you so very much for coming, for being here and hearing all these lies. Um, It's really special to have so many friends. Most of you here I know and are friends and have been friends for quite a while now. Some of you are my ex-students. Actually, quite a number of you, and I'm sorry I can't, I just cannot recognize people. I never could, you know, it's not because I'm old, although I am that too. It happens. Okay, a lot of people just thank. And I'm not even sure where to begin, and certainly there's no end to it. First of all, I really am moved and touched by all the lovely lies that Chris and Peter and Warren and Elaine have said. I'm sitting there and I'm going, that's really me? Or that was me? So, yeah, I wasn't going to say anything at all. I was just going to read something from a couple of things from the book. But seeing this crowd, I really am moved, and I don't think I will ever forget it. I appreciate it so much. Being a writer, and especially I think academic writing, but any writing, it really is a solitaire thing. You know, you write, you're there by yourself. Of course, your cat is sitting across your papers, or as my cat does, she tries to write poetry on the screen, and she's quite heavy now too, and she's not even 2 years old. All in the family. We all eat very well. Of course, I live with a magnificent cook that has been of no help. And yeah. And then the brain leaves you and memory leaves you. I was actually quite impressed, Chris, that you were also forgetting some things. Then I didn't feel so lonely. That is the one thing that has actually happened to me the last, I don't know, I can't remember how many months ago it started, or even maybe years, is some loss of memory. And I always wondered what I would lose first as I grew older. I didn't think I would lose my memory. And because my parents had amazing memories, but they had a culture of orality, and you depended on words and on your memory to pass on anything. And so I thought, oh, good, I just rested on their laurels. And I thought, oh, good, my memory will serve me forever. Not so. So I hope so many of you have come up and you had to introduce yourselves because I could not recognize you. But once you said your name, at least I remembered everything. So it's been really heartwarming. It's odd the way how we all change and yet not. Sort of like life. I especially owe so much to, well, first to Ruthie, who has been my partner for, I forget now how many years?
42.
42 years. And I'm still trying to teach her Cree. And she never did teach me German. But, so thank you. And Ruthie has always been very supportive of my work and my family. And she has a big family that she comes from. And I have loved every one of them. They're almost as nice as Ruthie. They're very special people, very special family. And Ruthie had the privilege of meeting my father. And I know she loved my dad. He was a very special person. Very, 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 what's the word? Calm, stable, steady, and hardworking, honest, a father who taught us to have integrity and honesty and to be hardworking as he was. And so Ruthie got to know him a little bit. Well, no, quite a few years. 10 years, yeah. Yeah. And they became great friends. So it's been very special. I don't know who to thank first, Chris or Peter. I'll tell you a story about how I met Chris. Well, I was in that committee where he was hired. And there were two of my colleagues, three of us women in that committee. And whenever we had a break, we would converge together, the three of us, and we'd talk about how dapper Chris was, how shiny his shoes were, and what a smooth talker he was. Oh, immaculate dress. Oh, and so we were suspicious. But despite all my efforts, he was hired. Actually, Chris, I supported your hiring, but I was never going to tell you that. And Chris and I, you know, we were civilized with each other, more or less. But one day, in how we became really good friends, I was very sad for a big personal reason. And I was walking past Chris's office and his door was open. And I thought, oh, what the heck, I'll say hi. So, and he looked really sad. And he looked almost like he had been crying. And I had been crying. And so we started talking. And after that, we never stopped. And then we went on drunks together. Story he won't tell you. The scotch that was flowing. And I hate scotch. So, as you can tell, we have a special friendship. Peter, I wouldn't be here without you. I don't know if you know that. I had just gotten a job at University of Calgary. I was not happy at U of M for a number of reasons. And I wanted to go back and live in my homeland. Although that would have been deep south of Alberta, wouldn't it? And so I was going to go to Alberta. But I thought I'll go and show Peter the contract and tell him I was leaving. And so I told him, I said, Peter, I'm about to sign this thing, and I have the contract. And he looks at me and says, no, you don't. Give that to me. So he grabs the contract, out the door he goes. And I'm standing there and going, yeah, where's my contract? And I waited. And when he had said, wait here. And it was really fast. So he came back up and about 10 minutes later, here, I have you a contract. I don't know how he did it. Maybe he slugged the guy. But the dean had actually agreed to meet some terms, to pay me more, to give me a chance to be promoted, which is something they never did. But Peter made that happen. Like I said, I don't know what he did or what he said, or how he committed me to the thing. But I did sign. And I have been very, very happy since Peter joined our department, and especially as department head. So I have these two best friends, Chris and Peter. And at staff retreats, the three of us would go out and secretly drink Jack Daniels. So, and finally, I can't say enough about Elaine Coburn. I really, when the other, what is it called? When the other is me, I had lots of difficulty with the publisher. And it was really a heartbreak and a real disappointment. And so when one day I got this email in 2017, I believe it was, from this person I had never heard of, from Paris, France. And I forget now what she wrote, but I think she had read something of my work. And what's that?
All the way from home.
Whoa. and I forget what she wrote, but we started corresponding through email, and eventually, mercifully, she moved. Oh yeah, and she invited me to a conference in Paris. And stupid me, I didn't go. I don't know why. Oh, I know why. I'm afraid of flying, actually. Especially over the pond. That's a long flight. Anyway, she moved back to Canada and to York University, and I did eventually meet her, and she did eventually convince me to have this collection. She said she wanted to put my writings together into a collection and as a book with the University of Toronto Press, which I guess was supposed to impress me. And I guess it did. Because I had had such horrible time with U of M Press, I was going to say that. And I thought, oh boy, here we go, let's see how this works out. Well, honestly, I have never worked with a much nicer, more pleasant, more erudite, more caring person than Elaine Coburn. And she's become a very good friend. And so thank you so much, Elaine. I really, if I had flowers, I would give you some. I didn't think they made editors like you. But there we were. So what could I say? She charmed me into saying yes to this collection, for which I'm grateful. And So I'm going to end by reading one story and one poem. Wires, two drinks. I'll read this, it's quite short, which is why I'm going to read it. And it's, the chapter is called Wasagecha, Comics, Shakespeare, and the Dictionary. Those of you who don't know, by the way, Wasagecha is a Cree legend, and white folklorists called him the trickster. And yeah, he did play tricks, but he was way more profound than just playing tricks. He was a mirror to Cree people to show them human foibles. And he used himself as the funny guy. But really, it's Cree people telling their own people our humanity. And our humanity, as you've heard already, is a wild mix of the good, bad, and the ugly. And even uglier. And gooder. All right, Wasagecha, Comics, Shakespeare, and the Dictionary. How does a Cree-speaking Métis with an orally based land culture begin the road to becoming a professor? A profession that, in large measure, is all about amassing books and filling one's life with the written and urban culture of colonial education. A more concrete way of putting this, and in terms of experience, is to say that my early childhood years were filled with the comical and yet complex Wasagecha, the pre-legendary figure. And my school years, on the other hand, were full of white invented savages, settlers, and Shakespeare, among the numerous fictional and non-fictional readings that public schools offered. For me, those years were both easy transition and difficult dissonance. I started this transition from orality to English literacy a long time ago. Perhaps it began at age 4 or 5, the moment in which I opened a cowboy and Indian comic books such as Billy the Kid, Davy Crockett, The Lone Ranger, and Tonto, and so forth. Or when I first saw pictures of Dick and Jane, Sally, Spot, and Puff in my older brother's red, yellow, and blue readers. These sources did two things to me. One, I wanted desperately to know how to read. And two, I became unconsciously more alienated from my childhood upbringing. I wanted to learn how to read for a very practical reason. I wanted to know what the little alphabets inside the cloud over each character's head in comic books were saying. In part, comic books spurred my thirst for literacy, and for a long time I thought literacy was the best thing ever invented. I thought so without realizing for many years that learning to read carried a cultural price. Without my knowing, these readings were the beginnings of my otherness, my intellectual exile in my own homeland. The dissonance between Wasagecha and cowboys and Indians. In short, Wasagecha brought me laughter and wonder. Cowboys and Indians comics and movies caused me discomfort, confusion, and racial shame. Wasagecha is ultimately about being human. Cowboys were all about dehumanizing and killing, quote, Indians. But all this is a big story that requires more space than I can give it here, and one that is relayed in a number of my writings and so on. The other big story about my journey from orality to literacy is actually more complex than just moving from a culture of words to a culture of writing. And that is difficult enough. What is not well known is that Métis Nation people can claim a rich literary heritage from both First Nation and Euro-Canadian peoples. They have inherited, as I have said elsewhere, a wealth of literatures spoken, sung, performed, painted, carved, engraved, pictographed, penned, and stereotyped, pun intended. And now cyber. In addition to this heritage, the Métis of Rupert's Land, along with other Native people, were involved in the development of the Cree-syllabary. Chris, how do you say that? Huh? Syllabary. There we go. So, yes, along with other Native people, were involved in the development of the Cree-syllabary in the 1840s. Slavic literacy spread among Native peoples throughout the plains and the north, right up to the 1970s. My mother and her sisters were literate women who wrote each other in the Slavic system. My mother used to read the Roman Catholic Bible and other religious material in Slavics. In effect, I grew up in literacy and in orality. Perhaps this is why learning the English alphabet and phonetic system came so easy for me. And actually, I learned how to read before I entered grade 1. And once in school, I loved reading and spelling the most. I still love words, whether Cree, Michif, English, or the little of French I learned in high school. And this love began by listening to my mother and sometimes grandmother tell us Cree legends and myths in Cree, or my mother reading to us from her Slavic Bible and pamphlets, or letters from her sisters. Both my grandmother and mother were fantastic storytellers. They did not just tell stories, they virtually performed them in their animated ways of speaking. Their ways of telling stories transported us to worlds and characters that were magical and transcendent. Sorry, RSV. I did get shots. Where was I? Yes, both my grandmother and mother were fantastic storytellers. They did not just tell stories, they virtually performed them in their animated ways of speaking. Their ways of telling stories, I said that, didn't I? Transported us to the worlds and characters that were magical and transcendent. I loved pictures too. Some comic books were also magical and transcendent, not only because of their storylines, but because of the visual art that inspired imagination. Like a giant yellow moon against a navy blue starry sky. Moon reflected off a perfectly still river which carried a man in a birch bark canoe. Like in the book of Hiawatha, or the giant yellow moon that lit the way in the dark for the singing donkey and his menagerie of fellow abandoned friends in search of a home. There is considerable universality to stories, whether told or written. In Coyote and the Roadrunner, for example, Coyote's attempts to trick Roadrunner, which always backfired on him, reminded me of the Sakecha's antics. Like Coyote, Sakecha was often wily, scheming, and overconfident, if not the downright braggart. Yet his schemes to outwit others often failed, and we could laugh with him, knowing intuitively that we all have tricksterisms in us. And so it is with Cariou. Stories can be a bridge between cultures. In an unexpected way, Visagecha and comics provided that bridge for me. I have retained my orality, and at the same time, my youthful encounters with comics turned into my love of books. Today, I have more books than I know what to do with. Books on nearly everything, and of course, loads related to my work and area of specialization. Do I have any special attachment to any particular books? I would have to say dictionaries. I have a lot of dictionaries and thesauruses. English, after all, is my second language, and I have had to look up a lot of words, a necessity I enjoyed early in high school. Indeed, as a graduate student, I often carried a dictionary right into my university classes. In the field that I teach, Native Studies, Indigenous Studies, some students, Native and non-Native alike, have difficulties writing essays. Part of that has to do with lack of timely research on their part, but it also has to do with lack of facility with the English language. Students often seem surprised when I tell them that English is my second language, and that it is the humble and oft neglected dictionary that has enabled me to deepen my knowledge of English. And these days, one does not even have to go to a library for a dictionary. They just have to go to their smartphones. Still, learning a second language is really a lifelong challenge. I never kept my comic books, but I have never forgotten them. Both the few beautiful ones and the all too numerous racist ones. Neither have I forgotten the Visagecha. Yes, I have more books than I have shelf space, as Elaine can tell you now. In fact, my mother, a fastidious and organized woman, would be horrified at how untidy my book stacks are. But I know she would be most happy that I still speak Cree and laugh with Visagecha quite often. Home stretch. And this is a poem I wrote actually very recently. In a way, I'm still writing it. Like all poetry, all writing, you're always still writing it. It's really never finished. And this one is called Power Lines. Power lines in northern Canada, South Africa, are not just telephone poles by railroad tracks, thick green glass transformers that call for target practice with railroad rocks when we were kids walking home from school. Power lines in northern Canada, South Africa, are not just hydro poles along graveled highways, now all paved, cutting through the great forests, felling poplars, pines, spruce, and birch, making foxes run, owls screech, squirrels scold, bear and deer hide, blue jays, robins, and chickadees growing silent, even crows sit sullen. Power lines in northern Canada, South Africa, are not just gas lines, burrowing under the earth, ground hogging, bulldozing blueberry meadows, flattening green slopes and hills, pushing off my Nukum's house, pushing her to the town ditch. Power lines are not just shiny black cables marking lines across the sky, now hiding everywhere under the earth and even seas. Power lines were in my comic books, in the pages of my schools, In the Hollywood history teachers told, making heroes of themselves. Power lines are on my face, my kidneys, my lungs, my eyes, maybe my mind. Power lines run all over. Already they run over the heroes too. Thank you so very much. And now book signing?
And now book signing. Yeah, exactly. We're going to move along to our signing portion of the evening, which again will take place at the table to my right. Feel free to have a book signed before you pay for it. So long as you can get into the line there, get your autograph, we'll be happy to help you afterward. A big thank you to all of you for being here tonight, both in person and online. Another big thank you to our presenters as well, Chris Trott, Peter Kulychyski, Warren Cariou, and Elaine Coburn. Let's hear it for them. And of course, the biggest and warmest thank you to Dr. Professor Emma LaRocque.